Do you struggle with tension in the front of your hips? Do you have trouble doing certain movements like a squat without feeling some discomfort? Well, you're in luck, because today I'm going to show you 3 moves to help open up your hip flexion range of motion. So the 3 moves I'm going to show you are going to be in a progressive order. So level 1's the easiest, and we're going to work our way up to level 3. So before we do these 3 moves, I gotta check my hip flexion range of motion to see what my baselines are. So you can easily do this at home by going up against a wall if you don't have good balance, or just holding on to something, and then just simply flex your hips. See how high you can raise your knee to the sky. For me, I'm getting a little bit of discomfort, or I feel like my hip flexor muscles are about to spasm, so I got some work to do. So first thing we're gonna do is a stretch. So I got some yoga blocks here. You can use some books at home, whatever you can stack up, shoe boxes, doesn't matter as long as you can get into that hip flexion range. And I noticed I had that tension on the right side, so for this video I'm gonna demonstrate that, but of course you can do this on both sides. So I'm gonna get into that flexion, so I'm gonna bring my foot up on this elevated surface. Now I'm already in a deeper hip flexion range than I could actively do standing up. What we wanna do is sit back and hinge forward. So now I'm getting into some really deep hip flexion. And then from the side, bringing this foot up. Again, I'm already in some good hip flexion, but I want to see if I can get more by sitting back, leaning forward. I'm at the end range of my hip flexion here. Now, if you don't have time, you can hang out in this position for about 30 seconds, but the gold standard is 2 minutes. And while you're down here, if you get bored, you can start to move your knee inwards and outwards to really test where your hip flexion's sticky. So mine's a little bit stickier if I put it in more of that adduction range. So that's just something I note when I'm doing my mobility training and what I need to open up next. After the 2 minutes from this position, I'm gonna rise up or grow myself tall while I try to keep my thigh glued to my stomach. As I lean back, I'm trying to actively keep that hip flexion range. You can see it dip down a little bit. So I hold that for anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds, reset, get deep into that hip flexion, rock back, try to keep that position. You can tell I'm shaking a little bit here. And as you're practicing this, if you rock back and you just can't lift this off, that's okay. Everybody's got to start somewhere, so you can just start at a little bit lower of a range, and if you just come up an inch, that's about what we're looking for. Then as you progress, you should be able to come higher and higher and lift off higher and higher. And then from the side, leaning forward, I did my stretch. Now I'm standing up and trying to actively hold on to that hip flexion range. All right, that was level 1. And I already feel my hips starting to loosen. But after we get that range of motion, we want to learn to control it. And that's what holds on to these mobility changes for longer periods of time. If I'm stacked up here, I want to get into this hip flexion range. And then from here, I'm just trying to drive my knee to the ceiling as far as possible. So I bring it up. Feel the hip flexors contracting, hold that for a good 3 seconds, come right back down, and then repeat. And then to progress this, you would just stack the yoga blocks or whatever you have higher and higher. So now I'm really into that hip flexion. Same thing, trying to stay stable here. Lifting it up, I can tell I don't have as much range to work with when I'm higher. But this is a great way to keep progressing your range as you get used to these moves. All right, and from the side, I'm just gonna do my lift-offs with the yoga blocks flat. Again, holding that contraction for about 3 seconds, bring it back down, and you can rep this out a good 10 to 15 times. And then again, you can get higher as you progress, so try not to move too much from the spine, just from the hip. It's not a ton of motion, but it's an active motion, and the higher you get to your end range, the more likely you are to feel crampy, which is totally normal. If it cramps, obviously just stop, lower the level, and then continue with your reps. All right, and I'm sweating, and that was only level 2. There is a 3rd level. So a review, level 1 was more of a passive stretch into an isometric hold of that hip flexion range. Level 2, we're trying to get some concentric end range, hip flexion range. But both of those are in what we call the linear plane, but life takes place in the rotational plane. So now we're gonna start working into more of our hip range. So I'll start lower here. And again, you could do this next to a wall and hold on. I'm just holding on to a PVC pipe here. This half kneeling position. From here, I'm going to just hip flex, come into that adduction range, and kind of just do some lift offs over top of the yoga blocks or whatever you're using. And then we're gonna lift up, rotate back over, plant. To really isolate that hip range, we really want to contract the whole body, so then we're stiff. All that isolated movement is coming from that hip now. And then of course from the side, lifting up, rotate over, plant, and then bring it right back. That's 1 rep going each way. And then if your height's too easy, well, just make it harder. So now that I'm higher, I really have to activate that hip range, bring it over. Oh, you can tell I'm clipping it a little bit. Whew. Bring it back down. All right, let's try that again. Really drive, hip up, over, plant. Beautiful. I'm gonna cramp if I keep doing this. You can think about doing about 10 reps each, but when you're at those outer limits, you might wanna reduce it to 5 just because you can cramp up. Now I'm gonna give you a bonus tip. We can use some more hip rotation range into our hip flexion because life happens in multiple planes of motion. So if we're still training the right side, I got my blocks in front of me. I'm gonna do like a half-kneeling hip car basically, where I'm gonna extend back, rotate. I'm just trying to isolate the movement from the hip, bring it up, tap, and then bring it right back through that range. Whew. If you're doing these rotational drills, I only do about 5 of these before I'm real lit up. And of course, if it's too easy, you just stack it higher. So I'm kicking back into that extension, up to that abduction, flexion, get it over the top, barely. Oh, whew. So clearly you see I still even have some work to do. And then you would reverse it. Bring it up, over, back, down, whew. Whew. If you do all 3 of these at one time, your hips will thank you, but you'll also feel like you got a good workout in. So after training my hip flexion level 1 all the way up to level 3, let's see what my active range is now. Now I'm gonna just drive knee as high as I can. Holy smokes, I got way more active range. So now if I get discomfort in a squat because of my hips, I should be able to get deeper into those ranges. So this is a great step-by-step hip flexion mobility drill that you can do if hip flexion is one of your biggest limitations. So if you can't tell by my sweat, these are pretty advanced hip mobility drills, or at least the last 2 were. So if you need to start with level 1 and stay there for a week or 2, totally fine. At least you know what your next progressions are. But if you have a lot of limitations, this is something you should train daily, if not twice a day in the morning and the evening. And if you train this consistently for a couple weeks, that's enough time to notice some of these changes. So if you're gonna do this, check your baselines. How much active hip flexion do you have? Do the drill. You get more, perfect. Really the best time to do this is before a workout, specifically a lower body workout. So if you warm up your active hip flexion and then go train it in the gym, you're gonna train your muscles in those newly acquired ranges, which is really gonna solidify those changes for longer term results. Also, if you guys want to see more content like this, where I pick a range of motion and show how I would level it up and train it, well, hit me in the comments below so I know what to make next. And of course, subscribe so you know when those videos come out. And if you're wondering how I activate my core before every workout, watch this video here for some more movement tips.